Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It's Sunday at about almost 9 o'clock. So, yeah, it was good. Last night I went to see a show at one of the coolest places around Hey Sailor. That was the show that we did our quantum release, uh, our album release show about almost 2 weeks ago now, which is hard to believe. And I went there last night, and there were some bands that also played there, and it was great. There was this band, The Worst from Portland, did a EP or an album release show there also. And but then I ended up coming home and relaxing for a little bit. I ended up going to bed wicked early for me. I was in bed by like 1 o'clock, which doesn't usually happen, so I got up kind of early, but it was good. So I am in the midst right now. This is kind of an unusual video for me, but I usually don't do. So I think this is like the first time this has ever happened. Really, it might be the first time this has ever happened. Uh, Period. And it's kind of a funny, strange thing, but in relation to how I watch movies or that kind of thing. So I've been in the midst of watching the entire Superman franchise starring Christopher Reeve, and I did a couple of shows on the first two films, Superman, and then Superman 2, 78, and then 81, and then which both those movies are just classics to me. For me, all kinds of great, nostalgic ties to those films. Definitely, those movies were like a huge part of my childhood growing up, and I still love those movies. I actually prefer them still to the more modern versions with Henry Cavill. I'm gonna do another show on that because that is gonna be part of this series because I'm trying to watch all of the old school ones, and then I'm gonna work my way into probably while rewatching Man of Steel, which I've always kind of been on the fence about. There's things about that movie I really like, and then there's things about that movie I don't like that kind of drive me crazy. It's weird. I think there are some very cool things about that movie, particularly in the first act of that movie, first two acts. But and then I'm gonna eventually get back into doing some. I have some animated series, animated movies with Superman that I'm gonna go back into also. I the way this whole kind of idea kind of came about was I watched the Death of Superman. I recently bought that on Blu-ray, and it's the animated movie that came out in 2018. I had only seen that once before, and I thought it was good. Like I thought it was pretty solid. I liked it, but I recently bought it a couple weeks ago. I was super psyched. It was pretty cheap, and I got it on Blu-ray, which was really awesome. So I watched it the other night, and I thought it was like totally awesome. I totally dug it, and I was totally into it, and I thought it was amazing, really. And that it just got my juices flowing as far as like, wow, okay, I want to watch, I want to do a series, and I have covered some of these movies. I know in the past I haven't done it. I haven't done um, like a full kind of more or less comprehensive coverage of the entire Superman series. I definitely haven't done them for the Christopher Reeve movies, but I have covered a few. I believe I covered the first movie before. I did a video on that, the original Superman, and I think I did a show on the second one. Probably something else too. I probably did, but I after watching the Death of Superman on Blu-ray, I just was like, this movie is totally kick-ass. I think it's the best animated version of Superman I've ever seen. But then I was like, you know what? I really want to dive into this and um, watch all the movies in succession, starting with the original '78 version, and then do shows on each of these movies. And I bought this about, I think it was probably about a year ago. I got this collection of Superman movies, which is over at the table there. I got the entire collection of the Superman movies. It comes with 5 movies, on DVD all of the Christopher Lee movies, but then the one that came out in the 2000 ish period with Brandon Ruth, Superman Returns, which is a pretty good movie. Uh, but it has all of the original movies, and I have not really seen the. I've seen the first two Superman movies, probably so many times I can't remember. I used to see them. I watched those first two films, you know, a bazillion times as a kid, and then I've seen them. I've seen them, in the more recent years. I've watched them too, a bunch of times. So I've seen those two movies so many times. But with Christopher Reeve, there were four movies made. Richard Donner, of course, directed the first two, and there were other directors that were kind of pulled in, and the franchise really kind of went off. I kind of think as a franchise, it really went into the crapper. But I have not really seen the third one or the fourth one in so long. I've probably have only seen the third Superman 3 and Superman 4 probably like maybe twice, which is really weird in comparison to say to the original films, which I can't even count, how many times I've seen that. Especially probably the first one. I mean, that was a movie I used to watch like constantly as a kid. And I've always been a huge Superman fan, so this whole thing has been fun to re-watch these movies. But then last night I got home and I started watching Superman 3, and um, what what a like what an incredibly strange follow up. It came out. Superman 3 came out in '83, so really a year or two after the second one. They were cranking these movies out at this time. It was directed by Richard Lester. Um, the casting for this movie is so strange. Christopher Reeve returns as Superman, but then it has Richard Pryor, Margaret Kidder's in it as Lois Lane for I think a little, not very much. Pamela Stephenson, and then the strangest casting is Robert Vaughn in this movie, and of course Richard Pryor. This came out in '83. Richard Pryor, you know, of course the world famous comedian, and in his prime, which was like probably the late '70s. I mean, he was one of the greatest kind of comedians ever, and he eventually he did some work with Gene Wilder. They became really close friends, and they started working together in films. And Richard Pryor eventually still did stand up, but in his prime time, in his heyday, he was one of the greatest comedians in the world, and one of the most influential comedians. So like that's a given. But he eventually he kept doing the comedy, the stand up and all of the stuff he's known for, and then he kind of moved into acting and trying to be in films and things like that. And with some success, he had some pretty big success. But this movie is an example of just not very successful and just really strange. Um, this movie, well, it's like again like I said, this video is a little bit unusual. Um, this movie is just god awful. Like it's so weird because it's like they tried to make this movie almost in like the whole opening of this film is like this weird kind of slapstick comedy thing. And it's so like silly and goofy. Like it feels like it's more of a kids movie. Um, it doesn't feel like a Superman movie at all. Like even the credits and the way they kind of reintroduce Superman in this movie, it's just so goofy and like silly and um and like the other thing that kind of just blew my mind on like how what they were thinking, what the studio, like what was going through their mind to follow up such classic films especially Superman 2, which is just such an epic film. General Zod and Terrence Stamp. I mean, it's just incredible, and the magnificent set pieces and the incredible battle scenes, and it's such an epic and exciting film. And then they follow up with something like this that is like, and I get that they were probably, they were scrambling, but they were making a lot of money as a franchise does, and then so they were scrambling to like really try to capitalize on that success, and they were probably, you know, had this idea of, maybe we'll throw the audience a big curveball and try something really different. Or it was either that or they just, you know, were utterly clueless as to like what direction to go into. And so I got about 40 minutes into this movie and it's really bad. Like it's really terrible. You have a really good cast, great actors. It's shot really well, but the story and the scenes, like there are these scenes of where Clark Kent, Superman, goes back to Smallville, his hometown of where he grew up, and um and he goes back to this like high school reunion in small town in Smallville. He goes to this like high school reunion and he like meets this girl that he used to have this crush on in high school. And they go and it's at this dance and it's just so weird and it's like it doesn't make any sense because up until this point, Superman is kind of devoted and he's in love with Lois Lane. Like that's kind of that whole relationship is really is fully realized in Superman 2. So it's fully realized and it's a thing. It's a kind of a part of the story. And then this film is so weird because he like goes to this reunion by himself, and in the beginning of this movie, there's no like Lois Lane, Margaret Kidder, and him are together, at the Daily Planet or in Metropolis, and it's like it's weird because there's no like chemistry between them at all. It's very awkward. Um, which was always a strength. I always felt like the first two Superman films, not only is it a superhero like really the first live action superhero movie we've ever really gotten, but it's an epic story. It's about hope and love and fun, and it has a lot of comedy to it. There's a lot of fun to it, but it's a love story. It's a pretty the love story is a pretty huge component, if not the biggest thing of these movies. And it's just really awkward, like there isn't any chemistry in the third one. And then Clark Kent goes to this high school reunion, and he's like flirting with this girl, and it's just really bad too. It's just the writing is terrible. Uh, the scenes feel like they were just like shot really quickly, and then thrown on, thrown on the in the editing room, and then maybe cut out, or they came back to it and then they decided to throw it in, and there's like no chemistry. The writing's bad. The scenes are really awkward. It's really weird, and it's just, it's one of the strangest and one of the most disappointing sequels I've ever seen. And I kind of I reached a point while I was watching it, was like, I can't take it. This is like this movie is giving me a headache. So at that point I stopped watching it. I just stopped watching it. And then I'm this morning I was like, okay, I'm gonna do another show like I usually do. I usually do a video every day. Um and and usually, typically what I'll do for these shows is I'll do like a little. I always do a little quick kind of read through, about that film that I'm gonna be talking about. I'll check on the date of when the film was released, the cast, and what year it came out. Usually, those three or four things. I'll usually have like a little note thing of those main things that I want to mention at least when I do one of these shows. So that's what I did. I was going to do a show on planning on doing a show on this movie like I normally do. And then I looked up, Superman 3, and I was, reading about it, getting ready to do the show, and then I was reading about it, and I'm like, this is really kind of unusual because um, when I was reading about the film, I'm like, this actually kind of sounds interesting. Because apparently in this film, there is this new form of kryptonite that is introduced later into the film, of which I haven't seen yet, of where I guess apparently Superman becomes evil. And there's a evil version of Superman. And that really kind of piqued my interest. I was like, huh, okay, maybe I need to check this movie out. So what I decided to do was like, okay, do two different reviews on the same movie, which sounds really strange. Like a review on kind of the first act, like what I'm talking about now, where I've seen about an hour of the film. Talk about my just how I thought this movie was really just really bad, and I couldn't take it anymore. It was giving me a headache. But then the other weird thing of like, now my interest is piqued again because now I want to see what that is about, like about Superman turning evil. Because again, I have not seen these movies. I've probably have only seen this movie probably twice, and it's been years since I've watched this movie. I probably watched it twice, like 30 years ago, maybe. And the same thing with Superman 4, which I've heard is, again, I totally forget that movie, and I remember it being just just such a terrible movie. But I think it might be the case of where it's so terrible, it might be good, but we'll see. So yeah, very strange. So this is a little mini side review of the film of Superman 3, of what my early reaction is or my early thoughts. But I'm gonna probably finish the rest of the movie tonight just out of curiosity, because I kind of want to see what they do in terms of the idea of Superman turning evil. So yeah, so stay tuned, and we'll see you next time. Peace.